Wormholes, particle physics, extra dimensions. Are the wonders of so-called reality really what they appear to be? Or do we exist in an elaborate hologram? Is our universe the result of random activity or the result of intelligent design? If a creator was involved, can we discover him through our perception of divine order? This is Into the Multiverse with Josh Peck.
You want the multiverse? You can't handle the multiverse. Well, here to handle the multiverse is myself and my lovely wife, Christina Peck. Christina,
Hello,
how are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Ready to handle the multiverse?
Ready to handle the multiverse.
Yes, me too. Today we're going to be talking about God's voice in string theory. Absolutely fascinating stuff. Before we get into that, though, if you haven't had a chance to check us out online, you can do so in a lot of different areas. I will let Christina explain what those are to you.
Yep, you can go to our homepage at skywatchtv.com, or you can go to our YouTube page at youtube.com / skywatchtv_official.
Yeah, we have to keep in mind the difference between backslash and forward slash.
Yes, somebody was very nice enough to let us know that it was a / and not a backslash. And
yes.
I don't know.
And I have been saying that for
years. Me
I've been
too.
saying it wrong for years.
Yeah.
Anyway, so today the topic is string theory, which is a very popular theory in physics today, but what it actually has to do with creation from a biblical perspective and God's voice. We should probably start with what I guess the atom.
The atom.
Yeah, we can start with actual particles. Now, the idea behind string theory is that particles are actually made of tiny vibrating strings, but we can actually start with an atom, which most people are going to be familiar with, and work our way down to a string. Now, it used to be years and years and years ago that the idea was that atoms were the smallest. Particle in existence.
And then later on, when you and I were in high school, it was the quark.
Yeah.
And then nothing else.
Yep. And then, but now there's string theory, quantum field theory, things like that. So there's
you
other.
can break it down smaller and smaller. Yeah. Like we can't physically see these things because, you know how we were discussing before the show. The artist illustration of them being
the atomic nucleus.
The atomic nucleus being like these little balls on top of each other and to form something, but really they pop in and out of existence. Yeah.
The idea, what an atom actually is you have what's called the atomic nucleus, which is basically protons and neutrons, and orbiting that is an electron or multiple electrons. That whole construct is what an atom is. You can kind of think of it as like a solar system, but on a quantum scale, which is kind of cool that it's the same design.
Yeah, we discussed that too. It was the same design, so you can tell that there was a creator with the same design. You know, it orbits the nucleus, and such as our planets orbit our sun, and then our galaxies. Who knows what that orbits?
Yeah. There is movement all over the universe, so it's really interesting. So moving down from the atom, you have an electron and protons and neutrons, which those are called nucleons. And you don't need to know all these terms or anything. It's just for those of you who might be interested to know them. But the atomic nucleus made of protons and neutrons, those particles are in themselves made of quarks and gluons.
Which is an interesting way you can think of it. The gluons is what holds the quarks together. And if you the perfect example, two open ends of a hose. The open ends of the hose are your quarks, and the gluon is a hose itself. Very impossible to break.
Yeah, the idea is that gluons are so strong they're impossible to break, and if you were even able to do so, there would just be two more quarks on either end. So you can't have a gluon by itself, just like you can't have, like the hose analogy.
Yeah, you can't have your
the
quarks
hose
by
itself
yourself.
is kind of the gluon, but you can't have a hose without the two ends. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So that brings us to the actual string. Now, the idea among many in string theory is that quarks which are fundamental or elementary particles, which basically means it's the smallest of the small when it comes to particles. They're not really made of anything in and of themselves, but they got to come from somewhere. So that's where string theory comes in. The idea is that there are, within each particle, there are tiny vibrating strings. And the vibration is what the particle actually is, the vibration from these strings. Now, the size of these strings is really interesting.
Yes. Let's see. The size of the string, the Planck length, is 10 to the negative 33rd centimeter.
Centimeters. It's what's called the Planck length. It is the smallest length possible. It's indivisible, which means you can't cut it in half. It's impossible to divide. And actually, there's a really interesting book written by physicist Lisa Randall.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she says that if you were to, it's impossible to probe those depths, but even if you were able to, what would happen is it would create a black hole and ruin everything that you're trying to work with anyway. So there's
you don't want to do that.
Yeah, and that interestingly enough does come up again, time and time again in physics, that when you reach one of these impossible things, a black hole happens. So it's kind of like a security system around reality that God has put in place.
There's no back door, to like a computer program or something. You can't get back at it.
Exactly. So the Planck length, it is the absolute smallest amount of length possible. And there are Planck boundaries all throughout reality, which we'll talk about in a later episode. But specific to that, that's the size, that's the theorized size of these vibrating strings, is the Planck length, or at least the width of Planck length. The actual length of the string might be a little bit longer, but the actual width. And interestingly enough, because it is a Planck length, that could constitute being one-dimensional. And that gets into the whole nother discussion about dimensions, which we've already talked about, and we will again.
The building blocks of dimensions.
Yes. But a two-dimensional plane can actually, in physics, is actually allowed a thickness.
Yeah.
And that's the Planck length.
That's pretty cool.
So there's a lot of cool stuff about Planck boundaries that we'll be getting into in a later episode. But that's the size that they think the string would be. That's vibrating and creating all these particles. There's this idea of unification of the forces, and that's what string theory really is. String theory was developed, it was a while ago, but superstring theory, what we call M theory nowadays, or just string theory for short, because that's what it is now, was put together in the 90s. We talked about that in a previous episode too, but it's a theory that tries to unify the four known forces of nature. A good example that I like to use is of electromagnetism.
Yeah.
Years ago, electricity and magnetism were considered two different forces, but they discovered that it's actually the same force. So when they were able to show that mathematically, they called the whole thing electromagnetism.
Yep.
So the idea is that maybe the other forces, which are gravity, strong nuclear force, and weak nuclear force, that maybe all the forces can be unified in that way, which is what's called a single unified theory. Or
we discussed this before the show, what that would look like.
Yeah, and because the problem that they're running into and have been for years is that gravity is so much weaker than the other forces. The other forces are pretty, they're equal enough to be able to combine, and they have been able to unify all of them except gravity. And that's actually the idea of open and closed strings. The idea is that most particles are made from open strings. So this gets into things called membranes, which, just for the purpose of this episode, it's the thing that our universe is resting on, or resting through, really might be a better way to explain it. And the idea is that with most particles, except for gravity, they're made from an open string. So if you picture a string, and it's attached into the brain, B-R-A-N-E, short for membrane.
Membranes.
Attached on one end, and then the other end's kind of free to do whatever it's going to do and vibrate and everything. But it's stuck within that brain and can't go off into hyperspace or into what's called the bulk, the space between universes. It can't go it's stuck in the brain. That's an open string. Every particle is like that except gravity.
Yep.
Gravity is what's called a closed string. And again, this is all theoretical stuff. None of it has been proven. But gravity, think of just a loop, like a string that is closed on the two ends are closed. Self-explanatory. But a closed string, such as a graviton, would be free to flow through the bulk, through hyperspace, and into other dimensions, other universes. That's why they think maybe why gravity is so much weaker than the other forces.
And it's so different everywhere you go.
Yeah, and that might be why gravity is so weak. And to further just illustrate that fact, because we do think that gravity is strong. I mean, every time I weigh myself in the bathroom scale, I'd like to just blame gravity instead of my own lack of discipline. But if you think about it this way, if you put a paper clip on the table, literally you have the entire Earth pulling down on that paper clip to hold it there. Yet all it takes is a single kitchen magnet to
pick it up,
to pull it off.
That's how weak it is.
That's how weak it is compared to the other forces.
Another interesting fact on gravity, it's kind of off topic, but still on the topic of gravity. Once you lay down at night and you go to sleep and then you stand up the next morning, you are actually 1 inch to 2 inches taller. And then throughout the day, you shrink down because of gravity.
Because
everything's pulling down on you.
Spaces in your spine. Yeah. So the whole idea is that every particle, every fundamental particle, is made of these tiny vibrating strings that are of the Planck length. Now, we're going to get more into that and what that has to do with the voice of God. But first, Skywatch TV has some really exciting stuff. There's a writing contest that I want to give you some information on, and then later we'll give you some information on a new book by Nita Horn called No Fences that I highly suggest you check out. So we'll be right back.
To celebrate the release of Nita Horn's inspiring new book, No Fences, Skywatch TV would like you to tell your story, because after all, even if you don't think so, you actually have a story.
Send in your story, and we are going to choose the 10 best, and they'll be published for Christmas release in an anthology of those stories, along with the book that you buy that is actually only $19.95. Am I right on that?
That's correct.
For free. Tom Horn, crazy guy, he's throwing in a journal, which on its own, most of these retail for $20 on their own. So this journal is to help you start writing your story. When you buy the book, not only are you going to be enrolled in this and you can send in your story, but you'll get a plastic pony, you'll get a journal of your own, and the proceeds from the book are going to help fund the studio we're building for Skywatch Women, and Nita Horn is going to be one of our panel members.
The 10 authors who are selected for the anthology, published by Defender Publishing in time for Christmas, will also receive a $500 cash prize.
That'll go a long way at Christmas time, won't it?
Yes, it will. Even if your story is not one of those selected for the anthology, if you've taken the time to write your story, you've left a legacy for your children and for your grandchildren.
Amen to that.
For complete instructions and details on this opportunity, please log on to skywatchtv.com/nofences.
All right, and we're back. So just to kind of recap, particles are made of strings, vibrating strings, and that's essentially what string theory is. So a lot of times I think there's this perception that things like string theory, M theory, all these theories, you got to be a genius to understand this stuff. And really it's not that bad. The basics aren't, it's not too horrible. Now there's a lot of math behind all this I would never be able to
It looks very scary, but once again, if you break it down, it step by step, it really isn't that bad.
Yeah, you just look at the basics. So what's interesting about string theory is they understand particles as the result of vibrating strings, but they don't know where those vibrations come from.
Yeah, this is the really cool part.
Yeah, the only thing that they can really say is that it has to be something extra dimensional because there's nothing within the 3 dimensions of space and one of time that we're aware of that would cause these strings to vibrate. So it has to be something from outside that.
Time. Outside of our
something
dimension.
extra dimensional.
Yep.
Now, it's really easy for us as Christians to just say, "Oh, that's God,"
Yep.
and then that's it, and then call it a day. And while that may be true, we can go a little deeper than that. Actually, Hebrews 11:3, one of my favorite verses because of this connection. Hebrews 11:3 says, "By faith we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible." So there's two main things to keep in mind in this verse. First, that the universe was created by the word of God.
Yeah.
So and there's other areas too that talk about, he spoke things into existence.
Yes.
But also that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. So what we see, what reality is, comes from something invisible, comes from
Exactly.
something, and what's invisible, extra dimension, we can perceive the three that we inhabit, but extra dimensions are completely invisible to us.
Yeah.
And that's where so Hebrews 11:3, essentially, if string theory is correct, and it might not be, it could be quantum field theory,
It
which
is
we'll
a
get into later.
hypothetical thing.
It is, but somehow there are these vibrations due to E equals MC squared, which is another thing we'll have to save for another episode, but because of that, there is energy, in a sense, being pumped into our reality. So
And it has to come from somewhere.
It has to come from somewhere.
Right.
And we believe that is the literal voice of God.
Voice of God speaking.
Now, the interesting thing, well, actually, before we do that, let's get into this parallel passage here. John 1:1-3. I'll let you read that.
Oh, sure. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made.
And that's talking about Jesus. We all understand that as talking about Jesus. So there are times that the word of the Lord is the literal voice of God, and there are some times that the word of the Lord is Jesus.
Talking about Jesus.
And actually, Dr. Michael Heiser has a lot of just fantastic. I can't recommend it enough. A lot of fantastic research out there. You can search on YouTube. You look up the Jewish Trinity by Michael Heiser,
Amazing.
and it'll blow your mind. But that's essentially what we're talking about. So this is Jesus, God in the flesh, created everything. Now, a lot of times when we think of creation, we think of a past event, something that's already happened.
But
yes,
it's continuous at the same time.
But it's continuous because when we think about this, where's God? Is he stuck in time with us?
No.
He can be in time, but he's not bound by it like we are. God is outside of time by nature. It's like if I were to build a house, I can go in and out of the house as I please, but I'm not bound by the house.
Right.
We can think of it kind of like that. That's how time is in relation to God. He's outside of time. So when he does something, it permeates all time, the whole timeline. The way I kind of envision it in my head is if when God spoke everything into existence, he didn't just speak that initial first point in the timeline, and then it just continued on from there. When he spoke, it went throughout the whole timeline and is actively creating and holding everything together
Exactly,
now.
and that is the reason why we are existing, is because the very voice and word of God
is allowing it to presently.
Yes, presently.
From outside of time. So our bodies, everything that's physical, everything around us that we see, our friends, family, children, ourselves, our own souls and spirits and thought, everything is a product of the literal voice of God right now.
Yep.
And always has been and always will be.
And it's amazing. And, we're expecting our third child right now.
Yeah.
And it's only because the literal voice of God is allowing it.
Yeah. And if it is string theory, then it's the voice of God that's vibrating those strings and causing reality to. And some of these particles are only in existence for nanoseconds. But still, it's holding everything together in the way that God designed it. So and the reason why this is so important, I really wanted to bring this up in this particular episode, is because there are some people who reject the idea of God being outside of time, and the reason is because they think they believe that it makes God seem more impersonal, like he's way out there somewhere and we can never. But actually, it's the complete opposite.
Yeah.
With him being outside of time and speaking creation into existence from outside of time, which is actively happening at every period in history and on into the future, there's no more personal than that. That's as personal as it gets. We are a literal product of his
voice.
of his creative voice.
Yeah. And it's amazing because, in the beginning when he created everything, he spoke everything to existence. We covered that. And it's incredible. And sometime in these episodes, I have to bring up certain dreams I've had growing
Absolutely.
up. I've had dreams ever since I was a young child of creation, how God created everything with a loud booming just force and with music. Absolutely beautiful, but beautiful colors. I've seen the creation of this earth and the creation of this galaxy. I've seen it from the time, I think the first dream I remember, I was 3 years old.
Wow.
I was 3. And that is what made me fall in love with math and physics and science and everything.
Wow.
That is where it all began.
That's
with
amazing.
that first dream. I was 3 years old.
Wow. Well, we certainly do serve a very personal and loving God. Now, a while ago, or actually pretty much every episode now, I've given the option for people to send in questions if they have a question they would like asked on air, and then we can talk about it, or even show suggestions. So we did have a question that was sent in, and I'm only going to use first names because I don't want to embarrass anybody. But a question from a viewer named Mia, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right. She asks, would you consider the representation of many dimensions from the movie Interstellar as correct, seeing that there are multiple rooms and the father in the movie is communicating via gravity? Excellent question. If you have not seen the movie, you might want to skip this part because I'm probably going to lay out some spoilers here. But
Excellent movie.
one of my favorites. It really is.
Definitely.
Now, I believe that pretty much they got it right. Now, something that we talked about before was the difference in dimensions when we consider time and space. In that movie, they kind of threw it all together. They looked at time as the fourth dimension, and the fifth dimension would be technically the fourth dimension of space. So that part was like, it's still technically right, but it's just kind of a confusing way to put it, because time is really a property of space. It's not its own separate dimension unless you're talking about just temporal dimensions or dimensions of time. Then yes, it is, but it's more of a property of space.
I do like how they depicted the black hole, or the sphere they went into, and is a three-dimensional ball and not this two-dimensional thing just swirling around space.
Yeah, because a lot of times when we see depiction of this on TV, it's almost like if you were to look into a sink drain or something.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. Like to them, that's how they
describe it. But it's not.
I like how they showed it as a three-dimensional thing, just like our moon, three-dimensional, our planet, everything.
And that's what it would be, because when a star collapses, it's pulling from all points of space at once, and the black hole would be a black sphere would really be more accurate.
Yeah, exactly.
But it is a hole as well. It's just a three-dimensional hole. So weird to think about.
It made sense.
They did an excellent job there. Also, the other big thing is he in the movie, I forget the character's name, but Matthew McConaughey mentioned that the extra dimensional beings were actually humans that evolved into fifth dimensional beings. Evolution in itself I'm not down with, but even if that were true, you can't evolve extra dimension. That's just not, no way. No. Because we didn't evolve from two-dimensional. No scientist would ever say that. So that's the other little thing. But besides that, fantastic movie.
Excellent movie.
Yeah,
one of my favorites.
Yeah, one of mine too. They really did a great job. Well, that is all the time that we have for this episode. If you would like to send in questions to be talked about on the show, go ahead and send them to jpeck@skywatchtv. That will go to me directly. Or if you have ideas for shows or anything that you want to see on the show, let us know, and we'll be happy to take a look, see what you got, and consider it. Also, check us out on Roku and YouTube at youtube.com/skywatchtv_official. And did I say skywatchtv.com?
I don't know if you did.
Well, I'm going to say it again, skywatchtv.com, and that is where, if you're interested in these types of things, you can get skywatchtvstore.com. You can get my 2 books, Quantum Creation and Cherubim Chariots, at a special discounted price. Make sure to check that out. So next week, we will be talking about the mysteries of time and entropy.
My favorite.
Yeah, so stay tuned. Until then, thank you for watching. Take care, and God bless.
From the time she was little, Nita dreamed of horses. Every childhood fantasy rode on the back of a heroic white steed, coming to save the day.
I don't know how long I've had this love in my heart for horses. It's just always been there. And when we were little girls, my sister and I would play all day long. I was always the white horse and she was always the little pink pig.
Let's pretend Lightning and Rosie can fly.
But everything changed in a heartbeat. On December 9th, 1971, a tragic car accident claimed the life of my dad and my best friend and my little sister. And I wondered after that if there was anything left to believe in.
Move aside, let the ambulance through. Please move aside.
As a child of 13, I felt like I had lost practically everything. And I wondered, is this it? I mean, where do I go from here? I could not have imagined back then how God could use horses, of all things, to restore my faith and vision for the future.
Starting April 19th, get your copy of Nita Horn's inspirational new book, No Fences, and learn for the first time her amazing story of loss, survival, determination, and healing. How the vision and love God gave her for these beautiful and majestic animals eventually led to the 150-acre Whispering Ponies Ranch, a general retreat facility, as well as a premier training location that specializes in using and gifting therapeutic animals to benefit the herding. Other care facilities, schools, and ministries across the nation.
When God puts something in your heart, it's there for a lifetime.